Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're exploring the residency options available in Mexico. Whether you're dreaming of retiring in Mexico or you want a Plan B residency, Mexico has a lot of different pathways to residency, especially for Canadians and Americans. In this video, we'll cover the main residency visa options, the temporary resident visa, the permanent resident visa, and other routes like family-based residency. We'll break down the requirements, the benefits, the application processes, and practical tips to help you navigate these options. So let's dive right in. First, let's start with the temporary resident visa, or residente temporal, which is the most common entry point for foreigners looking to live in Mexico, looking to get residency in Mexico. This temporary residency visa is ideal for people of all ages, retirees, digital nomads, expat families, really anyone with sufficient income or savings in order to get that Mexico residency, and we'll come to the numbers in a minute. It's going to be valid for 1 year initially and can be renewed for up to 3 additional years, totaling 4 years of temporary residency. After 4 years, you can renew to permanent residency without needing to reprove financial solvency, which is huge. You prove it once in the very beginning when you get your first residency permit, and then you never need to re-qualify, which is huge. To qualify for the temporary residence visa in 2025, you must demonstrate economic solvency, typically through one of 2 routes: monthly income or savings and investments. The financial requirements vary slightly by consulate or country that you apply from, but it's based on Mexico's 2025 minimum daily wage in Mexico City, which is currently at 278.8 pesos per day. And at an exchange rate of roughly 20 pesos to the US dollar, the general thresholds are as follows. So for monthly income, you need to show around $4,000 or $4,100 after taxes. This is after-tax income for the past 6 months. This can come from pensions, rental income, investment dividends, passive income ideally, or it could come from employment if it's remote work for a non-Mexican company. Typically, it's a little bit more complicated when you're using employment income because you might need a letter from your employer. This is something we help people do at MyLatinLife. Savings or investments is usually quite easier in terms of paperwork. You need to show a minimum balance of approximately $68,000 maintained over the past 12 months. So every monthly statement needs to be above that minimum threshold of $68,000. And again, that varies based on the exchange rate. Some consulates like Houston might have slightly higher amounts, around $4,400 for income or around $70K for savings. And then some other consulates are famous for having slightly lower thresholds, like I think El Paso or some of the ones right near the border are famous for having slightly lower thresholds. The application process begins at a Mexican consulate in your home country. As an American, you could technically go to any consulate in the US, though you should be going to ones where you're resident in that jurisdiction. But usually if you can, come up with an address, if you have a cousin that lives, in a different city, that will usually suffice. And again, with Canada, you can technically go to any consulate in Canada. In Ontario, there's ones both in Ottawa as well as Toronto and in Leamington, Ontario, of all places. And then so you can kind of, depending on your logistics, depending on how far you're willing to travel to get an appointment, that could potentially speed up the process. Processing times. Well, when people ask about processing times, you need to realize it's a 2-step process. So you apply for the visa through the consulate in your home country. And what will happen is at your appointment or shortly after your appointment, you'll get a visa affixed to your passport book. It's sort of like a sticker that they put on one of the pages of your passport. That's step 1. And then step 2 is you have 6 months to enter Mexico to pick up your resident card. You'll get your photo taken, you'll get your biometrics taken in Mexico at an appointment in Mexico. So that's step 2 of the process. So when you think about the timeline, Are we talking about the timeline all the way to getting that residency card in hands, which in my opinion is what we're kind of optimizing for? The temporary resident visa offers several benefits. You can enter and exit Mexico multiple times, unlimited times really. You can open a bank account. It makes it a little bit easier to buy property. And you get access to Mexico's public healthcare system, the IMSS. I think you might have to pay into that to do it. Not too many foreigners use the public healthcare in Mexico. Most people opt for private healthcare and paying for cash, which is really, really affordable and really high quality in Mexico, the private healthcare. So that's worthy of its own video. But most people don't realize that as a resident of Mexico, there is a way to use certain public healthcare services. People also ask about the work permit. As a temporary resident, you do need an additional I&M approval. So basically, out of the box, you're not allowed to work in Mexico. But once you're a resident, it's actually pretty easy to quote unquote tack on to your residency and ask for that additional approval so that you can work in Mexico because maybe you got a job offer, things like that. You can also start businesses in Mexico. We help people do that as well. Here at MyLatinLife, you can spin up Mexican corporate entities to buy property and do business in Mexico. And by the way, MyLatinLife, we're a full-scale immigration consultancy. We help people get residency and citizenship in Mexico. We help Mexican Americans get Mexican citizenship by descent. We help normal Americans and Canadians with no familiar ties to Mexico. We help them get residency via economic solvency, like we've been talking about in this video. So if you want to get residency or citizenship in Mexico, there's a link in the description where you can book a call with us. You can book a one-on-one consultation. We can get all your burning questions answered, build you a custom game plan, and ultimately put that residency card in your hands. Now let's talk about permanent residency in Mexico, being a residente permanente, which is really for life. In Mexico, it's probably one of the best permanent residencies in the world. It's one of the few that I'm aware of where you get to maintain permanent residency for life with basically no requirements to visit the country whatsoever. A lot of other countries, like say Panama, where I also have permanent residency, I have to visit every 2 years to keep the permanent residency active. In Paraguay, they recommend visiting once every 3 years as a permanent resident. So Mexico is really quite unique in that you can have this basically back pocket permanent residency. You can keep living full-time in the US or Canada or Europe, wherever you're from, and maintain this permanent residency in Mexico basically as a backup. And you can get this backup permanent residency for your whole family, for your kids, for everybody. And then in the future, if your kids want to say, go to university in Mexico, or you want to retire in Mexico 10, 20 years down the line, you'll have this residency waiting for you. And because you can get bank accounts, you can get credit cards as a resident, you can build this whole second economic life outside of your home country so that you're not completely tied to one country's economic system. You know, we see a lot of people get their bank accounts shut down in Canada and so forth. And as a asset protection play or as a diversification play, currency diversification as well, you can allocate some of your money to Mexico, some of your investments to Mexico. It's very easy to invest in bonds and in different government bonds in Mexico, paying upwards of 10% per year in interest income. Cool. So permanent residency. To get direct permanent residency, it is possible, but you need to be 65 plus, maybe 63 plus when applying from the consulate for most people. Now, there have been cases where people have gotten permanent residency in their 30s or for younger people in general. This is less and less common now. Sometimes if people really have a hookup, if people really know the guy that works in the Mexico office, it is possible to get direct permanent residency, but it's not something that you can count on if you're less than 60 years old. Now, in addition to age being an important requirement, there's also higher financial thresholds. So you need to show monthly income of about 6,800 for the past 6 months, or savings and investments of approximately 272,000. So call it close to 300K. So, and of course that range fluctuates. So some consulates might require about 7,500 monthly or about 280K in savings. And then when you add dependents, you have to add typically an extra 30% to that number. Okay, so if you were looking at a couple, that number would go even higher, right? And if you have 2 kids, that number goes even higher. The application process basically mirrors the temporary resident visa. You apply at a Mexican consulate with the same documents, the application form, your passport, your financial proof, all the documents. And really, it's just an assessment of whether you're going to get permanent or whether you're going to get temporary. Now, our team of lawyers at MyLatinLife, we know how to push for permanent residency in those close cases. We have cases where people, they have the money, they have the assets, and maybe they're like 62 years old, and so they're just not sure. And so we can push in those cases to get permanent residency because it is nice to lock it in as permanent residency. Right now, as it stands, temporary residency in Mexico is awesome. There's still really no downside other than the fact that you need to do renewals at the 1 and 4 year mark. So call it 3 trips to Mexico in total over a 4-year period. But of course, if you can go to direct permanent residency and skip those extra 2 trips to Mexico, then, all the better. And the other piece of it is the rules change all the time. So maybe in the future, renewing from temporary residency to permanent residency, maybe that process changes. Maybe you have to requalify financially. Maybe they change the number of years on that timeline. In this world of residency and citizenship, things change all the time. So the faster that you can lock in your temporary residency, the faster you can get it is only going to be of benefit to you. The faster you can lock in the permanent residency, potentially lock in citizenship as well, if you're willing to spend some time on the ground in Mexico. It's just an absolute no-brainer. And so if you qualify, just get it now while you qualify. If you see a program that you like, do it now while you qualify, because these things change all the time. And we've seen it happen in Mexico with the end of the regularization program. We've seen also the financial requirements rise considerably, or even just a couple of years ago, the financial threshold was only like $2,000 of income. Now it's gone up above $4,000 in income. So they're making it harder all the time. Another pathway to residency we haven't talked about yet is through family unification. This applies if you are married to a Mexican citizen, if you're in a common law partnership with a Mexican citizen or permanent resident, or if you're a parent, child, or sibling of a Mexican citizen or permanent resident. This route can often allow you to skip the financial solvency. For example, if your spouse is Mexican, you can get immediate residency in Mexico and you don't need to show financial solvency. You don't need to show any bank statements or anything like that. So it's much less paperwork in that sense. And it's a much more, sure thing, I guess you could say, where there's less rejections because, hey, if you have a marriage certificate and a couple other documents, that's really all you need. This can be a faster track to permanent residency as well. I believe last time I checked with my team, they said for marriage visas specifically, you would start with 1 year of temporary residency, and then after 1 year, it would renew to permanent. Okay? If you have a child in Mexico, you should be going direct to permanent residency, which is one of the only paths to direct permanent residency, is having a child in Mexico, right? So there's a couple different family dynamics and ways to get residency in Mexico there, but just know that family reunification visas are totally doable in Mexico, and it's a much easier process than something like that would be in, say, Canada or the US. So family reunification in Mexico is one of our top strategies. It's something we do a lot. The last residency type I wanted to mention is the investor visa. Now, Mexico doesn't offer a traditional golden visa like, say, Italy or Spain. What we have in Mexico is a investor visa where if you invest a certain amount of money in Mexican industry, then you can get a visa that way. The number you're looking at, according to my notes here, is about $150,000 or 3 million pesos. In my mind, the number was actually higher. So if anyone wants to double check that, you can leave it in the comments below. But long story short, you need to invest a six-figure sum in Mexico in order to get an investor visa. And so it kind of doesn't make sense because it's like, why invest the money in Mexico to get the residency visa when you can simply show the money in a bank account and get a visa that way, right? Where for temporary residency visa, you only need to show about $68,000, $70,000 in the bank every month for the past 12 months. So why not just do that and just show the money rather than having to make a six-figure investment in Mexico? So it's pretty uncommon to go that route. But hey, if you're going to be investing in Mexico anyway, I guess you might as well get a residency permit alongside that. The thing is, you'd have to show all these documents regarding the investment, and maybe that's going to be the proof of property ownership or some of those documents related to corporate ownership. So it's a little bit more complicated of a case than just showing bank accounts in a lot of ways. So it's a less common route, but could potentially suit entrepreneurs and investors. Comparing the options, what we see the most is temporary residence for people who can show that 4K income or about 70K in savings. That's really, really common. We also see a lot of Mexico citizenship by descent. There's tens of millions of Mexican Americans who could potentially qualify for this program, who are the children of Mexican citizens or the grandchildren of Mexican citizens. Or if you have other parents from other Latin American countries, you can potentially get citizenship from those countries as well. We do a lot of citizenship for, El Salvador citizenship by descent, Guatemala, Honduras citizenship by descent. And then what you can potentially do is use that passport to apply for the Mexico residency, and you might actually have a fast track to citizenship via a preferred nationality, which is pretty interesting. So lots of different routes to residency in Mexico. There's definitely a strategy to which route makes the most sense for you. There's a strategy about where to apply, whether it's the consulate versus on the ground in Mexico. So again, if you would like help applying for residency in Mexico, there's a link in the description to book a call with us, and we can get you residency in Mexico. Mexico is a paradise for retirees, for expat families where homeschooling is 100% legal, for digital nomads who want to extend their runway and want to have that low cost of living and live like a king. Mexico's awesome. There's popular spots all over the country for different types of people. Maybe a young person might want to go to Playa del Carmen. Maybe a retiree might want to go to Puerto Vallarta. Maybe an expat family might prefer somewhere like Merida or Mexico City, where they have top-tier private schools. So there's really something for everybody in Mexico. And once you get residency in Mexico, you're really unlocking that whole country for life. In summary, Mexico's 2025 residency options include temporary residency, permanent residency, family unification, investor visas, citizenship by descent, lots of different pathways to residency, and even citizenship in Mexico. If you have more questions about the specific residency visas or citizenship in Mexico, we have other videos on this channel, tons of videos that I recommend you check out. So subscribe to the channel, like the video, hit the notification bell, and we'll see you in the next video.